Aesthetic features and their effects on meanings in Andrew McGahan's The White Earth. Irony. Irony plays in the incongruity between John McIver's words and his actions. He claims that he has a deep connection with the land, and it is one that he proudly inculcates to William. He introduces the Quran station to William as a place that is alive in its own right. It has a history, it is growing and changing all the time, it breathes, page 85. He claims, "This land talks to me," page 181. However, his actions show differently. First, he disrespects the history of the land by dismissing the traditional owners, the First Nations, with whom he should be sharing his land ownership. He covers up the crime committed against the Aboriginal settlers and unearths the evidence by burning the bones. Second, he ignores the changes, the imminent new law associated with owning the land, and remains deaf from Ruth's prophetic messages about the imminent Native Title Act. Instead, he continuously manages the Australian Independence League and fosters white racist attitudes towards Aboriginal native land ownership. Third, his claim that the land breathes and that it talks to him is contradicted by his defiance of the land's connection with the native settlers whose lives were nourished by the living land. Indeed, the author Andrew McGahan recommends a perspective that the real and ethical way of owning the land is by respecting the traditional owners and recognizing their partnership in land ownership. The author positions the audience to embrace the justice behind the provisions of the Native Title Act, an essential ingredient to living rightfully and peacefully in Australia. Allusions and foreshadowing. McGahan features the quintessentially Australian poem Waltzing Matilda to allude to the hypocrisy of the cultural assumptions, values and beliefs harbored by racist landowners. For their rally, they disregard the contemporary and inclusive themes of the Advance Australia Fair national anthem and instead use the Waltzing Matilda song that they consider to be suitable for their cause. The persona, the swagman, is a hard worker of the land, steals a sheep, refuses to admit his crime, jumps into the water and dies. The swagman's image may be relatable to the members of the Australian Independence League, but in McGahan's irony and satire, the swagman's identity is analogous to the landowners, the squatters, who essentially steal ownership, not of sheep, but of land from the Aboriginal people. The death of the swagman in Waltzing Matilda foreshadows John McIver's death. Instead of jumping into the water, he escapes the water to face a punishing and hellish death by fire. John McIver, a squatter himself, dies from refusing to reconciling and sharing the land with the First Nations. McGahan offers a perspective against the squatters' immoral disrespect and unrecognition of the traditional owners of the land. Symbolism and motif. William symbolizes the young Australian nation who soaks in the conflicting values of the old white discourse espoused by John McIver and the young advancing contemporary ideas of Ruth. John McIver's beliefs are encapsulated in his view that land ownership is meaningless if it is not absolute, page 192, which means that sharing the land is not ownership of the land. This belief echoes the archaic Judeo-Christian attitude to stewardship, which is dominion over the land. This contradicts Ruth's new, inclusive and advancing idea that owning the land is recognizing the traditional owners, respecting their connection with the land, upholding the native title law, and repealing the tyrannous belief. Ruth even has an important message to this contemporary good news: reconcile with the atrocities of the past, admit the mistakes of the past, and bear the essence of forgiveness. Malcolm's diary, that has the record of the massacre, the wrongs of the past, completes the image of the truth of Ruth, the lawyer, the new millennium woman prophet. William's ailment, a motif in the narrative, is a symbol of the collective malady of the attitudes of hypocrisy, prejudice, and apathy that pervade in the Australian society, especially when the people refuse to listen to the gospels of justice, respect, and truth. The narrative of the novel morally implies that this ailment may worsen if the national consciousness clings to the values of the old, white, Judeo-Christian prejudicial beliefs. Contrastingly, like William who gets better in the presence of Ruth, as shown in the epilogue, the people may experience healing and improvement when Australians support and uphold the new and liberating principles of the Native Title Act. Her message is contained in her anti-terra nullius teaching, Other People Were Already Here, page 276. The messages of justice and truth of Ruth are the key to the alleviation and redemption of the nation from its ailing situation. The uses of contrast and the dichotomy of values between black and white are also a motif of the narrative. The White Cemetery, aptly named after the whites, situated near the confines of the old Curran house, contrasts with the black cemetery that lies in the waterhole, in the bush, far from the comforts of the house. The white settlement, above the black soil, is illustrated through the white campground of the Australian Independence League in the old site where traditional Aboriginal settlers previously celebrate their corroborees and culture. John McIver symbolizes the cultural assumptions of the old white culture, and Ruth represents the beliefs and perspectives of the new law, respect, reconciliation, and inclusion of the First Nation Australians. These aesthetic techniques stringently highlight the dichotomy of identities and values between the two races while imbuing a perspective of acceptance and respect for the First Nations culture. McGahan's recurring use of fire as an element of unease and punishment affirms the Australian Gothic fear of discomfort and death experienced during the dry summer months and seasons of bushfires. William's father's death in the prologue foreshadows the hostile and punishing nature of fire, as seen in the death of Oliver while taking advantage of the trees in the mountains. The man on fire in William's vision while being on a personal journey in the mountain. The death of Veronica while giving way to her desire to inherit the station. All these build a crescendo for the reader to feel the horrific depiction of John McIver's death while covering up evidence from the mountains. John McIver's death clearly trumpets the perspective of the narrative that subscription to the old white selfish, disrespectful, and prejudicial attitudes may be a flaw that can lead to one's own demise.